There is grandeur in this view of life.
Welcome to Evolution Talk with Rick Coast, an introduction to the oldest story ever told.
Between the years of 1717 and 1723, the world was introduced to this. That's Cello Suite No. 1 in G by Johann Sebastian Bach. Bach was born in 1685, and he's regarded as being one of the greatest composers of all time. He's often referred to as a genius. And then there's Jimi Hendrix. That composition is Francis Scott Key's Star-Spangled Banner. The rendition, as interpreted by Hendrix, was unlike anything anyone had ever heard when it was performed at Woodstock on August 18, 1969. You either loved it or you hated it. For those who loved it, it could bring you to tears. So, what is it about music that elicits this response? What makes you want to dance or to cry or even to go out and punch something? There's no denying the power of music. But why does it have this power? From where does it come? It's not the same as language. It seems deeper than that, much deeper. A piece of music can bring you back in time to a point in your past when you were happy, sad, or just content. Now, if you've ever felt a tingle in your scalp or goosebumps or even a lump in your throat when a certain song is played, then you know what I mean. Now, I'm pretty sure I'm right in assuming that you have a favorite music decade as well. Mine happens to be the 1970s. I love the music of the 70s. I've always loved Led Zeppelin, Neil Young, Carole King, any of those artists from that period of time. Now, I have to say I wasn't a big fan of the 80s. But as I grow older, when a song from the 80s comes on, even one I didn't care for at the time, I'm immediately brought back to a point in my life when I was just beginning to learn what life was all about. A wave of nostalgia often accompanies that music. For example, whenever I hear Foreigner's I Want to Know What Love Is, I remember a particular Christmas Eve sitting near our family's tree and MTV was playing in the background. It was a happy moment, but it was a couple of years away from my parents' divorce and one of the last Christmases that we would ever have as a family. Now, thinking about that time, the moment I was lying on the floor by the tree listening to music, is exactly what Thomas Edison had in mind when he invented the phonograph in 1877. That was a little over 100 years before the Christmas I'm referring to. Today, we take the ability to listen to music for granted. With an Apple Music subscription, I can pretty much call up any song I want to listen to, and Pandora presents you and I with the music we love to hear using a sort of complicated algorithm that caters to our tastes. But in Edison's day, if you wanted to listen to music, you had to attend a live performance, and that cost money, extra money, which most people didn't have, at least not to spend on a night out to listen to live musicians. Most of the music that you would have been exposed to would have been in church. Edison and his phonograph changed all of that. It brought music to your living rooms. It brought it to your ears and to your hearts.
I'll have a blue Christmas.
The thing is, music is everywhere. And not just its accessibility, but its very presence. And it has been for a long time, and possibly for millions of years. Every culture here on Earth has music as one of the threads that holds it together. The omnipresence of music once caused Charles Darwin to write that
music must be ranked among the most mysterious with which he is endowed.
So where did it come from? Where in our evolutionary past did music originate and for what purpose? We can come up with 1,000 words today in no time at all to explain why it's important to us now, but why was it in its very beginnings? What role did it play in our evolution as a species? For something so deeply ingrained within us and our culture, it had to have provided some benefit to us, right?
Think of this. Think of, for instance, the early days of music.
That's philosopher Daniel Dennett at a talk he gave on the evolution of music and language.
When a few proto-musicians began humming tunes or making sounds, with no particular aim, but they found they rather enjoyed this. And they also found that some of the little ditties they hummed were picked up by their conspecifics. They spread. They didn't know why, but they liked the effect. And pretty soon you begin to get traditions of certain musical forms growing up without any composers, without any deliberate composition, without any deliberate invention, but just with the spreading of habits from individual to individual.
This spreading of habits is often referred to as memes, not unlike genes which are transferred and replicate biologically. Memes do so socially. So as Professor Dennett was saying, these memes spread from person to person.
And with natural selection over the memes, pruning these down to the ones that were the best replicators, the one that stuck in the head the best, the ones that were most readily transmitted from one singer to the next, and so forth.
Genes and memes were not terms that were used in Darwin's day, but he assumed that for something to last, it must have provided some benefit to an organism. His focus was on biological benefits, and for this, I will turn to Professor of Psychology Anirudh Patel to help explain Darwin's approach.
Darwin felt, based on his belief, that music must have had some sort of biological origin. It must exist because it helped our ancestors survive somehow, to have these qualities of being ancient, universal, and powerful. And to explain it, he turned to a theory that he developed called sexual selection, which he spent much of his book actually discussing with respect to other species. Sexual selection is a well-accepted idea in evolutionary biology, and it's thought to help explain elaborate displays and traits of organisms that don't necessarily help them in the day-to-day struggle for existence, but they help them attract a mate. So, for example, the male peacock carries behind him an enormous tail.
A tail which obviously attracts predators as well as potential mates.
So a male peacock will fan the tail and do an elaborate shimmery display to attract a female, and that's a picture. Birdsong is thought to be another example of sexual selection. Many species of birds sing, and it's the males that sing these elaborate songs in order to attract a female or to defend a territory. Darwin was quite aware of these behaviors and felt that sexual selection could explain them, and he felt that perhaps that could explain our musical abilities as well. And even speculated that our ancestors had a kind of pre-verbal form of communication, a musical proto-language, sort of singing without words that we use to attract mates as part of courtship. And maybe that's why it evolved in our species and has such emotional resonance for our species.
That emotional resonance may have been one of the key factors in the gradual evolution of musical notes, or the humming of notes, to something like language.
It is therefore probable that the imitation of musical cries by articulate sounds may have given rise to words expressive of various complex emotions.
These views, Darwin's views, of course clashed with many of the sensibilities of his time. The formation of language was no different. To claim that mankind's apparent unique ability to communicate through language might have originated from a common ground shared by birds and their songs was to many
Poppycock.
One such opponent to Darwin's views was Friedrich Max Müller, a professor of linguistics at Oxford University. In 1861, he penned a scathing response to what he viewed as a dangerous and ridiculous notion.
Language is the Rubicon which divides man from beast, and no animal will ever cross it. The science of language will yet enable us to withstand the extreme theories of the Darwinians and to draw a hard and fast line between man and brutes.
And Müller wasn't alone. Even Alfred Russel Wallace, one of Darwin's staunch defenders, and also a man who came up with the theory of evolution by natural selection at roughly the same time, he felt that man was unique in many ways and an exception to some of natural selection's rules. Linguistics aside, to help understand the evolution of music in man, we must look for hard evidence. To speculate on meme transfer and birdsong is one thing. What we must also ask is, how far back does it go? And thankfully, we do have some answers to that question. Archaeological answers that date back 43,000 years, at least when it comes to musical tools. For example, in 1995, a flute was discovered at a site in Slovenia, or to be fair, what appeared to be a flute. Hand axes dating back 1.7 million years have been discovered throughout Europe, But this was the first appearance of an item which served a purpose that didn't involve hunting or fighting. The flute in question was formed from the femur of a cave bear, and it's only a fragment of the original object. Two very distinct holes are present, and what appears to be two more at each ends where the breaks in the femur occur. The holes are spaced in such a way as to indicate an attempt at a musical scale, just like a modern-day flute. As to who made it, if it was made at all, and not the chance result of an animal's teeth, that's up for debate. Many theorists point to it as being the product of Neanderthal craftsmanship, but still others have suggested it's of Cro-Magnon origin. But whatever the case may be, if it is an early attempt at a recognizably musical device, it does suggest that music as performed using tools and not just the human voice has been with us for more than 43,000 years. And the reason we aren't stumbling upon others is that instruments such as these are made out of materials which are perishable, like bone or wood, unlike hand axes and other stone tools which can last for millions of years. So the question does remain. Even if we find similar instruments as the one found in Slovenia, when did we first become enraptured with music? To make a tool to mimic or enhance what the human voice can do, we had to have first done so with our voice. That desire to hum had to have been there first in order for us to want to copy it, or to reproduce it artificially. And this goes back to Darwin's question and what was suggested by Daniel Dennett at the beginning of the episode. What came first? Language or the humming of musical notes? Biologically, everything is there to allow for both, and it has been there for a surprisingly long time. Inside of your neck, there's this little small bone called a hyoid. It's like a little horseshoe. The current thought is, or the current thinking is, that the shape of the hyoid is due to our voice boxes moving into a position that allows for speech. And not just to talk, but to sing as well. The exciting thing is, that little hyoid is also present in our Neanderthal cousins. And what this suggests is that they too had this capability. But what we don't know and may never know is how we and other early human species took advantage of this capability, and for what purpose. To help answer this question, we've also turned to brain imaging. Positron emission tomography and also functional magnetic resonance imaging has revealed that certain areas of the brain light up when you and I hear music. It's hardwired into us. The same area in my brain will light up when I hear music, just as it will yours. Biologically, this activity takes place in the right hemisphere, as opposed to the left. Speech and language processing are mostly located in the left hemisphere. There is overlap, of course, but this does suggest an evolutionary past that perhaps selected for these abilities. So could they have evolved together? Dean Falk, an evolutionary anthropologist at Florida State University, has suggested as much. The correct question may not be which came first, but the one Darwin asked. What was the evolutionary advantage of music? Music moves us. That much we can all agree on. But we are also moved in subtle ways by what is being said to us. You might say to me, I can't believe that happened. And, depending on your inflection and tone of voice, I can interpret your emotional state even though the sentence itself can be taken in many ways. You might be sad, you might be excited, happy, or frustrated. But it's in how you say it, the tone behind those words, that tells me what I need to know.
We're conveying information through affect or prosody or tone of voice all the time. And that's from the musical side of the brain, and it's important information. It's giving information above and beyond the spoken symbolic words and adults, and it takes a long time for a child to get to do this.
Tone, inflection, and words. They all convey information, and how they are produced adds an entirely new dimension to it, one which transcends simple grunts. We are a social creature after all. To live in groups, we must communicate with one another, and in our early stages, before we had the ability to put words together or even attempt to, we probably helped one another doing small tasks, such as grooming and sharing food. Now, I'm sure there were grunts here and there, and those grunts probably didn't convey a whole lot of information at first, other than to let you know that, hey, I'm here, I'm part of this group, or even just to get your attention. Now, eventually, tone and inflection had to develop in order to add a depth to the information that they were trying to convey to one another. Adding tone and emotional depths to our grunts may have been an early precursor to singing and the use of words. It could also have been used as a form of identity to let others know that you're part of that group. As groups grew larger, not everyone in those groups were related. You needed some way to say, I'm here and I'm part of this group. How do you do this without words?
The idea that music has something to do with promoting social cohesion. Now, cross-culturally, music is very often a social activity. I know today many people walk around with iPods listening to music by themselves, but cross-culturally and in many cultures, music is often social. And this is an example of an image taken from Captain Cook's voyages to Tahiti in the 1700s, showing a group of Tahitians dancing and drumming. And the argument is here that music is a social activity that bonds people together, that makes them feel connected emotionally to each other. And that perhaps this was its function, that human groups are characterized by all kinds of forces that drive people apart, conflict over resources, whatever. But in our ancestors, the theory is that to survive, groups had to cooperate. Members of groups had to cooperate with each other to outcompete other groups. And perhaps music was one way of getting everybody emotionally feeling connected to each other, so they were more cooperative with each other outside of musical context. This is just one of the theories being discussed today.
That's Anirudh Patel again. Music does bond people together. And let's not forget Darwin's case of sexual selection. As groups grow, there's competition for mates. Now, we don't have elaborate tail displays to attract mates like peacocks, but we can display strength and health. And one way to do this is by hunting and bringing home the largest animal. But in those quieter times, perhaps after dinner while everyone is, lounging around the campfire, we may have done something else, like dance. Dancing may have served as a show of health and good genes. Singing as well. We see this today with music stars and pop singers. They don't seem to have any trouble attracting the attention of the opposite sex. It's all about the beat.
Don't mean a thing if you ain't got that swing.
Or perhaps we are thinking way too deeply about this. Perhaps music is nothing more than auditory cheesecake. And this is how psychologist Dr. Steven Pinker once described music. Whereas Daniel Dennett used music or humming as a means to get from grunts to words, Dr. Pinker sees it as being the other way around, and not even an important step. Music tickles our emotions that are unique to us as a species, and that we developed as a means to cope in this world for the last 6 million years. Hearing or producing music is enjoyable, just as a piece of cheesecake is. I didn't develop a sense of taste in order to appreciate cheesecake. I had the sense of taste before ever encountering the cheesecake. And now it's my go-to dessert on the menu, especially peanut butter cheesecake. But if the World Health Organization were to suddenly declare cheesecake a health hazard and it were to all disappear off shelves and menus, according to Dr. Pinker, we might miss it, but life would go on fine without it. It's the same line of thinking that prompted the famous psychologist William James to say that, as far as music is concerned,
the love of music is a mere incidental byproduct of the nervous system.
Somewhere along the line, we picked up the love of music, and it stuck.
Play for some fine music by Count Basie and the orchestra from the Avedon in downtown Los Angeles.
But how about this? You know how your foot will tap to a beat as if it has a mind of its own? You might think that you don't have rhythm, but try telling your foot that. It seems to follow what's going on just fine without any help from you. There's a direct causal connection there. A cause and effect reaction with music at its center. Regardless of what Pinker and James have stated, the pendulum seems to swing once again to there being something biological going on here, something innate. You're not taught to appreciate the beat or to tap your foot, you just feel it. And the amazing thing is, you and I, we're not alone. Not as far as being a species who loves a good drum beat. In 2009, a video went viral that showed a cockatoo named Snowball getting his groove on to the Backstreet Boys. The video caused Professor of Psychology Anirudh Patel, whom we met earlier in this episode, caused him to sit up and take notice. So he contacted Snowball's owner and asked if they could run him through some tests. Well, Snowball, not the owner. Just some testing to see how well Snowball could keep a beat. Now, with cameras rolling, they adjusted the speed and the tempo of the song, and Snowball didn't miss a step. It was
The first case of another species spontaneously synchronizing to the beat of music.
It might be the first case, but it's not the only case. Since then, the ability to recognize and move to the beat has been seen in chimpanzees, bonobos, and even a sea lion at the University of California. When I was a child, my mother had this little porcelain music box in the shape of 3 nuns. If I was having a hard time falling asleep, a few good turns of the nuns and I'd be fast asleep. It's something about music that soothes us, that lets us know that everything is okay. Evolutionary musicologist Joseph Jordania has suggested that in our far distant past, music may have served as a means to let the group know that everything is okay. It might have served as a group identifier. A gentle humming that let everyone know that they were in the right place and that they were safe. It's that whole idea of music as a social glue again.
He was the musical technocrat of his age. He was not just an intuitive genius. He was a musical sort of proto-engineer doing with musical means what breeders were doing to improve the breed of domesticated species.
Perhaps that's why music pulls at our emotions. As Daniel Dennett just said, musicians, like animal breeders, have selected for what works and what doesn't for centuries. What Bach and others have done is to bring it all together in unique and wonderful ways. And that's a selective process. It has been molded to accompany us along our own evolutionary path, a constant companion to dance to, cry with, and to pour our hearts into. I admit to being brought to tears by particular songs. Sometimes I can't even explain why. I've often said that music saved my life as a teenager. When life seemed overwhelming, a trip to the record store put everything into perspective. There was beauty in the world, and with each piece of vinyl I held in my hands, there was potential there. With each record, I wondered if I would find the one that had the song that spoke directly to me, the song that would serve as the soundtrack to my life. I think we all feel that way. If music is a piece of auditory cheesecake, I don't think we'd be fine without it. I, for one, don't want my fork to come back empty. Empty forks and silent guitars. It sounds like it should be the title of a song, doesn't it? Evolution Talk is written and produced by myself, Rick Coast. Now, if you enjoyed the show, and I really hope you do, you can help the show by sharing it. Tell your friends about it. And if you're a patron of the arts and you want to help me produce more episodes, head on over to evolutiontalk.com/support. The music in today's episode was composed by 2 very talented musicians, Chad Crouch, otherwise known as Podington Bear, and Dokasha Turu. Now, as always, thank you for listening, and until next time, please take care of yourself.
Evolution Talk is a Rick Coast production.